So we are here today. It's June the 26th is the International Day. Has been declared some nine years ago by the United Nations as the International Day of Solidarity with Victims of Torture. You know, I mean, we may not even have the same political opinions or come from the same social class, or you know, one is a teacher, one is this, he's an artist, I teach English, you know, we're all from a variety. We're ordinary people, you know, that have been persecuted because all of us, together with many who are not disabled, we wanted to see a just society. We want to see a different society.
Torture is wrong, and the United States' involvement in torture is a disgrace, and we simply oppose it. There are many ways we try to oppose torture in the world, and the torture which the Bush administration has implemented. This is our way of saying publicly, it must stop.
I think there's no question that the outsourcing of torture is a perfect name for what extraordinary rendition really is. We find the practice to be completely unlawful. It essentially bases itself in secrecy, in operating outside of the law, outside of any kind of judicial review, where people are picked up, they're bundled onto an airplane, sometimes drugged, shackled, taken somewhere where they don't know where they are, sometimes their family doesn't know where they are, at times transported to places even from which they were seeking asylum, and then put into prisons where they're frequently tortured, sometimes held just on mistaken identity. And so it basically is a way of taking people into custody outside of any of the traditional safeguards that would keep innocent people from going into custody, that would keep people from being tortured, and that would prevent human rights abuses.
The United States has not transported anyone and will not transport anyone to a country when we believe he will be tortured. Where appropriate, the United States seeks assurances that transferred persons will not be tortured.
Ultimately, diplomatic assurances are worthless. No country, whether it's whether it's the United States or France or Egypt or Saudi Arabia, is going to let you inside their prisons to see how they're handling their prisoners.
And what we're doing, as most of you know, with the extraordinary renditions, we're not only putting the people on our own plane after seizing them off the streets of Milan or the airport in Sweden. We pick them up, we put them on our own planes, we fly them to another country, we turn them over with a list of questions the CIA wants answered, and we keep money going, and often the CIA person is there helping advise what kind of more information they want. If that's not conspiracy, I don't know what is.
Well, Human Rights First thinks that it's a fundamental problem to hold individuals in secret and provide them no access to any sort of humanitarian organizations, and not to tell anybody that they're being detained. This is a clear violation of international human rights standards. It can also be a violation of international humanitarian law.
I think the United States has used the secret prisons and has justified the secret prisons by saying, you know, when you have very high-value detainees that you have to question, that they can't have interference from the outside world and they can't be scrutinized. I think the reality of the situation is whenever you have that kind of secrecy, whenever you disappear people, it's always a recipe for human rights violations. And this has actually been the subject of public debate. What the administration wants to call alternative interrogation techniques, which are widely thought to be techniques like waterboarding or the cold room technique, where somebody is put in a room that's around 50 degrees and repeatedly doused with cold water, sleep deprivation, stress positions, using some of the tactics that the United States themselves calls torture in their country report on human rights when they look at it being done in other countries. And so for those of us in the human rights field, it seems like nothing more than a cynical attempt than to take these people, put them outside the reach of the law, and to use techniques that would never be acceptable in a U.S. prison system. Guantanamo Bay at this point has become the epitome of every bad policy that the United States has engaged in pursuant to the war on terror. If you look at Guantanamo right now, you have over 400 men, some who have been held for almost 5 years now, the vast majority without charge. Some of the men in Guantanamo were rendered to other countries and tortured before being brought to Guantanamo. Some of them are facing, only 10 of them actually currently are charged, facing trial by an unfair system that actually gives less rights to foreign nationals, which is a violation of our U.S. commitments under the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and some of them were the disappeared, who have certainly suddenly reappeared and been put in Guantanamo. So every bad policy the U.S. is engaged in, not to mention the types of interrogation techniques that broach the line of torture, if not cruel and human degrading treatment, are all epitomized by Guantanamo.
In fact, one of the techniques we're using in Guantanamo that the FBI thought was too bad to even participate in is called short shackling, and it was banned by the UN several years ago. And it's a combination of sensory assaults. You bolt the person's hands and feet to the floor, leave them for 20 hours with no clothing and no toilet privileges, with the temperatures going way up and then way down, and blasting stereo music that's just almost deafening, and strobe lights in their face. And the FBI people said they were coming in and finding people unconscious in a pool of filth the next day.
The fact remains that treatment is proper, and there's no doubt in my mind that it is humane and appropriate and consistent with the Geneva Convention for the most part.
Remember, these are the ones in Guantanamo Bay are killers. They don't share the same values we share.
In both the theoretical sense and the very practical sense, it needs to be closed. It needs to be closed symbolically because it really has come to highlight all U.S. abuses under the War on Terror, but also in the practical sense because it's unacceptable to say that you could pick up people and hold them, as recently a Department of Defense official said, that you could hold them for the rest of their natural lives without ever charging them, without ever trying them or giving them any opportunity to challenge their detention.
If the United States abandons this commitment, what hope do we have of holding other governments to account? Senator McCain and Senator Graham, when they introduced the amendment, was that the problem about anyone beginning to use torture, and especially if it seems to be a norm within our own country, that it endangers our troops ultimately. And this seems to be a prophetic example of that. We lead best when we lead with example, and that example should be a good one. And I believe it can be a good one, and that's what the American people really want.
But it's really each of us on the level taking on our conscience and to struggle and not to accept and to believe that torture and assassination can never be justified.